Hello, friends. I'm truly excited to share with you that I'm hosting my first online summit. It's called Boost Your Child's IQ and EQ. Too often, parents focus primarily on activities to enhance one of them, either their child's thinking skills or their emotional intelligence. Or they get into discussion of which one will have a greater influence on success in life. But why don't we give our kids the ultimate advantage by improving both? So on October 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, live on Zoom, two amazing speakers will give us actionable advice on how to boost both our kids' cognitive functions and their ability to understand and manage emotions. If you're a regular listener of the podcast, you may already know them, the brain engineer S.T. Rappaport and Dr. Talia Jackson. These two charming ladies have been my guests on the show, and judging by the downloads of these episodes, you guys are definitely interested in what they have to say. During the event, they'll go deeper into these topics, and they'll give you even more tools for your parenting toolbox. And you'll have the chance to ask your own questions, share your own struggles, and seek advice. Save your spot by visiting the link in the show notes and show up live on October 11th, or get the replay if you can't make it. But it's important to register for the summit so I can reach you and send you the link. This event is completely free, but it won't be aired on the podcast. So if you're interested, you have to take action. I cannot wait to meet you guys live. Hi, I'm Billy, and this is the Unlock Your Child's Full Potential podcast. I'm a mom of 3 lovely girls, and I'm looking for answers. I'm looking for ways to fill the gaps left by the school system and teach my kids the lessons that are going to prepare them for real life. I want to learn practical tips that I can use to raise capable and confident young people who are kind, caring, and authentic, and who bring value to the world. I know it's a lot, but I think as parents, we have the unique role of nurturing the potential of the special human beings entrusted to our care. We can't expect school and the teachers to do everything, and we don't want to let the environment decide who our kids become. It's up to us to coach our children on how to be successful and fulfilled. That's my goal here, to talk to as many parents, educators, experts, you name it, and ask the questions, look for the universal principles, find as many tools as possible to be a better parent, and give my kids a head start in life. If that resonates with you, join me every Wednesday and let's inspire each other to create an environment where our children can blossom into the best versions of themselves. Hi friends, today we welcome Ashton Rodenhiser on the show. Ashton is a graphic recorder, aka professional sketchnoter, and the founder of Mind's Eye Creative Consulting. She has worked with Fortune 500 companies and helped break down complex ideas into an easily understandable visual language, enabling others to retain more information. Ashton is on a mission to teach other people how to use these same techniques to harness their creativity, embrace imperfection, and capture information in new, powerful, and fun ways. In this conversation, we will learn how to make note-taking fun and effective and help our kids stay focused longer in class and remember more. Hi, Ashton. I'm so excited to have you on the show. I recently had a brain engineer on the topic of improving kids' thinking skills. So when I saw that you use drawing as a thinking tool, I was immediately interested in hearing more. So would you please tell us how you got started on this journey?
Yeah, so I felt like I really started to follow a very untraditional path when I was in high school, when everybody was trying to quote unquote figure out what they want to be when they grew up and starting to choose different like post-secondary education. I didn't know what I wanted to do. All I knew was I really wanted to be a mother.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and that wasn't welcomed with a lot of positivity at the time when you're 17, 18 years old and everyone's asking you what you want to do and you just want to be a mom. It wasn't looked on as very friendly.
Yeah, I get that.
And I didn't really want to go off to university and pick a path that I just didn't know what I wanted to do. So I decided to enroll in the local community college and take early childhood education because I figured it was a pretty transferable skill that I could look after other kids and work with kids until I had my own. So I started on that path, and I actually ended up getting a really awesome job at a nonprofit family resource center. And in that space, I started learning a lot about community development and working not just with kids, but I got to work with parents. And the last few years that I was there, I transitioned into a facilitator role. So I was like early 20s, like teaching parenting programs. It was like, and I didn't have kids yet. It was kind of a funny little thing, but the parents were so awesome and supportive of my skill set and stuff too, and what I had to share. So it was a really great opportunity to, work within that field, but also learn about and work as a facilitator. It was less about my knowledge and more about asking good questions and holding a safe space for discussion, for people to be able to share things that are hard to share with other people in their lives. So I really, really fell in love with the role of a facilitator. I wanted to move back home to where I grew up. So I had to leave that job because it didn't make sense to travel back and forth. So I started working with kids a little bit more again. And in the meantime, a friend of mine who was a facilitator, he told me about a workshop that was coming up. And at the time, my first child was 6 months old. And I attended this one-day workshop around graphic facilitation. As cliche as it sounds, I took that one-day workshop 10 years ago and the rest was history. I really fell in love with the beautiful coming together of these two worlds for me, this love of facilitation and holding space for people and being able to feed back what I used to do in just words. Now I can feed back in images and pictures. And this other world of myself that I never really had an opportunity to explore of what it would be to be an artist. I think I secretly wanted to be an artist growing up, but it wasn't even an option because there's just so much stigma and lack of support of what it would look like to be an artist when you grew up, right? So
yeah,
it was this really beautiful to coming together of, my passion around creativity and this facilitation world. So I kind of decided after I really started to experience the power of this type of work, I decided kind of leave facilitation behind and just partner up with awesome facilitators who do that really, really well. And I really wanted to figure out how to do the graphic aspect of facilitation. I just decided to go 100% all in on that. In my first few years, I just sort of played around, tried to develop my skill, kept having kids. And after my second child was born, he was about 6 months to a year when I was like, okay, I really love this. I'm going to decide to go 100% all in trying to develop a business around it. So I started surrounding myself with others who were in this field and had successful businesses. So I kind of was like, if they can figure it out, I'm sure I could figure it out. So
great mindset.
It was a slow journey those first few years. And I just sort of played around with it and worked when I could. And now here we are.
Amazing. Would you explain to our listeners what exactly is sketchnoting? What do you do?
Yeah, so I guess I use the word graphic facilitation a lot. And there's three kind of worlds. And, unfortunately, every industry has their buzzwords that nobody understands. So I'm going to try to break them down. So graphic facilitation is more of that when I'm working with a company or nonprofit and they're trying to move through a decision. A very common place is strategic planning. So you're getting the executives or the board or whoever into that room and you're trying to figure out your vision for the next few years. That's a common kind of graphic facilitation scenario. Graphic recording, or as I've been more calling it lately, live illustration, that world is more of a conference space where I'm not really engaged in the process. I'm more of a fly on the wall. So there's a presenter, I draw it out. By the end of the time that they are done talking, we have a visual representation of just that presentation, whereas graphic facilitation, it's more of an illustration of the whole collective conversation.
And the second one is more like a summary.
It's more of a summary. Yeah, it's just I'm not embedded into the process and there's just one voice instead of multiple voices. Okay. And then visual note taking or sketchnoting, which was coined by a guy in 2006, I believe, named Mike Rohde, uses all the same skill sets as a graphic facilitator, live illustrator, graphic recorder, but it's more for personal note taking. Using the same type of tools and the same methodology, but you're listening more so for yourself and your own learning and what's resonating with you as a person instead of as a professional, I'm trying to listen as a whole for everybody. It might have a bit of a different spin when it comes to content that you're capturing, but they all use the pretty much the same kind of skill set, the listening, the synthesizing in your mind, the thinking about what you're hearing, and then the capturing with a combination of words and language and drums.
Okay, how does it happen so fast? While person is talking, you get to analyze it and draw the thing on paper. It sounds incredible to me.
Yeah, it definitely is a muscle that you have to work. And unfortunately, it's not great for perfectionists. So if you're a perfectionist, I know, I'm sorry. You have to really embrace accidents on the page, like, Bob Ross's happy little accidents. You have to channel that. And you have to let go of trying to capture everything and really waiting, being patient and listening to what's resonating with you the most and how it reflects with some of the other things that you've captured on the page. So I find in what I call, when I say traditional note taking, it's more so that very linear, you've got your lined paper, you've got, and you're just capturing across a line and you're going the next one and it's all words. I find a lot of people have just defaulted in the classroom. That's just the way that you capture. And when you're in that space, I found when I was younger, at least, you are frantic to capture everything, right? As much as you humanly possibly can. And our brains just don't work that way. We can't. It's impossible to capture it all. So you're just stressing yourself out for something you can't even do anyway. So sketchnoting allows you to kind of go back to the space where you can't capture everything. So what you're going to capture is you're going to try to find the most meaningful things to you in that moment, or the things that are coming up and rising to the top. And then capturing the details to support those big ideas as much as you can, or whatever's resonating with you, but letting go of the idea that you have to capture everything.
In the traditional note-taking, you just write passively what you hear. And it sounds to me that when you try to analyze the information and see what resonates with you, you're actually doing the work in the lecture.
In the moment. In the moment. Rather than trying to take your notes maybe later and trying to decipher. And the example that I like to give the most in this type of situation is, imagine you're a school teacher and you got two students. One student is doing sort of like traditional note taking. It's just lines of words on a page and just a whole page of words. The other student, you have little blocks of words. It's not as many words, but they're kind of placed around the page. And imagine there's like little lines and little squares and like little people drawn, and they're maybe using different colors. If you're the school teacher and you look over the shoulder of each of those students, which student would you look at to see their understanding? Did they understand what just happened or what was just discussed? With the sketchnoting, you'll be able to see very clearly what it is that they understood, rather than the traditional note taker. You can't see at a glance. Maybe they understood the same, like we'd never know, but from a teaching perspective, you wouldn't necessarily be able to gauge the understanding of that learning. With the sketchnoting, you have an opportunity to provide real-time feedback and clarification, because maybe they captured something that wasn't necessarily correct, or like you can comment on their learning and ask them to speak more about something, right? So it like deepens the conversation, it carries on that conversation, rather than the traditional note-taking student, like you just have absolutely no idea what they've actually learned, if anything.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that visual note-taking can completely substitute the traditional note-taking?
Obviously, I'm biased in the sense of like, like everything would be great if everyone, like, I imagine a day where you just like walk into every classroom and everybody's like drawing all the information, right? Like that's like think that's like a dream world for me. I would love to see. There's a debate out around learning styles, right? Some say that learning styles are debunked, blah, blah, blah. But I still experience people, the number one thing that people say to me, like when I'm at a conference or what have you, is I'm a visual learner. So people still resonate, even though technically they're debunked, with preferred ways of learning. There was a stat out there at one point with lots of debate around what's the percentage of people that are visual learners. And I've heard anywhere between 60 to 80. With preferences, there's still going to be like a huge percentage of kids in a classroom that like to learn in a visual way. And the example I always give is YouTube is the second highest search engine in the world for a reason, right? We want to see people doing things. I'm just kind of in tune to listening a lot. I don't have to see. As long as I can hear what they're saying, I can capture it. I prefer it that way now, I think, just because I'm just so used to it. But I'm not going to say it's going to work for all students, of course, or all kiddos, but I would take a guess based on my experience and some of the science and stats out there that there is going to be a decent portion of a classroom that would resonate with something like this. One thing that I've really been encountering lately as I've been teaching this skill to a lot of people is that when people hear, oh, you're drawing your own notes, they think it's like a complete like 360 or 180, whatever it is. Like now you have to take all your words and turn them into drawings. And that's not the case. Words are still going to be very important to capture in information. You're using simple drawing elements to help connect those ideas and to bring additional meaning to them. It doesn't mean that now you're taking all the words and replacing them with images. You're using images to help build connections. So people that I find are kind of stuck in that mindset of like how to get started, usually I just say, okay, start with like 95% words and 5% drawings on your page, right? Just use some lines, use little squares. Like we're not talking about huge illustrations here. We're just talking about
because people can say, I
can
draw, I'm not an artistic person, so drawing is far out of my skill set. Yeah. So what do you say to people like that?
Showing is the best way. So if I can show people how to draw something in a very short amount of time and they experience that, they're like, oh, I guess I can draw, right? So we have, unfortunately, this notion around creativity and art, and a lot of it stems from a not so great experience in childhood. I've experienced a lot of people have that one moment in their childhood where someone squashed their creativity, and from that day forward, they decided, I am not creative, I am not an artist. But if you ask most children, are you an artist? They're like, yeah, of course I am. But at some point along the way, if they have that experience, they don't have like the support of somebody to tell them otherwise, they go from, of course I'm creative, of course I'm an artist, to no, I can't be creative, I'm not an artist. We have to redefine what drawing is. So drawing is not something that we go to an art gallery and we go and we look at it and we go, oh, that's a drawing. I can't do that, but that's a drawing. We separate ourselves from art as like an appreciator of art, or someone who doesn't appreciate it because they don't understand it. So they're like, I don't know, like that's not my thing. We can use art in so many different ways. Like that's why there's art therapists and all these things. And if we can start to try to rewrite what drawing is and use it not as something that is other than us or separate from us or something that I can't do, but somebody else can, drawing is a tool that we can use to help ourselves think, right? So when you put pen to paper in this way, you're capturing some words and you're also adding in some drawings. There's like the dual code theory where when you add words and you add pictures, it like solidifies that learning deeper, right? So we're using it to help us. We're not looking to create the next masterpiece, right? And if it's really messy, that's actually really great because we're not looking to create works of art. like I like to teach aesthetics when I'm teaching sketchnoting just because people want their sketchnote to look nice. And I totally appreciate that. So I do work towards that. But at its core, the action of sketchnoting is just, if not more important than what it looks like at the end of a class or a lecture or a presentation or what have you. Like, if it is messy, that's great. Like, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day how nice it looks. It's about
That's good to hear.
like there's the listening, there's the making sense, and then there's the capturing, right? And everyone focuses on the capturing part, but the listening and the making sense to that information, and then translating that into not just the words, but the pictures, like that's like the sweet spot. Like that's where the learning is happening.
And
when
is
you're
there
putting
a
pen to paper.
specific visual language that you use every time you make notes that you have to learn, or you draw from your imagination? For example, if you have to draw a girl, does it look the same every time?
There's sort of what I call the drawing elements. Then there's like a visual vocabulary. So your drawing elements are your things that are like your lines and your arrows and your containers and your little people and your color. There's like the things that are like foundational that are probably going to show up in every sketch note, because you're not using a line just to draw a line. You're using a line to connect information, to show separation, to spark or highlight something, or you're using an arrows to show direction. Like you're using something as simple as a line and an arrow for a purpose on your sketch note, right? So, and you can learn those elements in like 15 minutes if you want to. A good portion of the illustration aspect is actually those foundational elements. They're the lines and the arrows and how I use color and all those things. It's not rocket science, right? As you can hear me talk about it. Then you can start to build your visual vocabulary. So if you want to start adding more illustrative elements into it, that's where you can start to learn different icons that can represent different things. So in the book that I wrote, The Beginner's Guide to Sketchnoting, I don't even introduce your visual vocabulary like till the end of the book, because we have to like build upon until we get there. But I find a lot of people, they want to just jump right to like drawing something without learning sort of the foundation. But ideally, when you start out, to help you build confidence, you draw something that can represent multiple things. So a magnifying glass is one of the things that I tend to draw all the time. And it's a really great one because it can represent many ideas. So it can represent focus, it can represent analyze, it can like zoom in on something. Like you can choosing icons that represent multiple ideas, are some of those ones that are nice to learn when you first start out, because you can hear different words and you have one thing that you already know how to draw that you can capture. The caveat is like you already know how to draw it. So practicing just drawing a little magnifying glass over and over again for like 2-3 minutes will help to put it into your mind and your visual vocabulary. So when you hear the word analyze or focus, you're like, analyze, focus, magnifying glass. Okay, I already know how to draw it. There's no hesitation when you go to put pen to paper. You're like, boom, boom, circle, circle, line, line, done. So to answer your question around like the girl, like if I have a girl, like I have a certain style of people that I have developed now. The foundation of how I draw my little girl is going to be the same, but like maybe they have straight hair, maybe they have curly hair, maybe they have light tone skin, maybe they have dark tone skin. Like I change it up every time I would draw one, but the foundation of like how I draw that person is the same. I just change little things about them every time so that just to change it up depending on the situation I'm in. Or
for the aesthetics. Yeah.
For aesthetics, yeah.
So how do we start with sketchnoting? If we want to inspire the kids to try it out, how do we start them? I know you have a 15-minute video workshop when you walk people through some tips on sketchnoting. Is that the best place to start?
Yeah, well, I developed that workshop because I was finding like that's the biggest barrier for people is drawing your first one. And once you draw your first one, it's just like a band-aid, right? Like you just have to do it. And then you're like, oh, I did it. Look at me. Like I did one, I could do lots of them. So people could certainly walk through, and I kind of teach about sketchnoting while I'm showing them how to draw sketchnote. It's very like insular or whatever. And the book is just an extension of that workshop. It just goes in deeper to each piece of that I kind of touch on very, very briefly in that workshop. But just very quickly, some of the first things that you could start with is throw your lined paper away and start drawing on blank pieces of paper. It could be colorful if you want to, but usually I start with like just a blank white piece of printer paper, 8.5 by 11. If you went bigger, that would be even better, but just plain white paper. And instead of holding it portrait style, we're going to turn it on its side and it's going to be landscape style. So that shift alone triggers your brain and your thinking to go, we're doing something different here. There's something different going on. I'm not capturing in the same way that I always capture, right? So even just that small change of your paper can sometimes be just enough to help to start that creativity going. And we usually always start with a title at the top because sometimes it can be very uncomfortable to start with a blank page. So if you know the name of the class you're in or whatever is going on, if you're listening to a TED Talk, you could put the title with the name of the speaker or what have you. And then you enter, because sometimes, it can be starting with a blank piece of paper can be very intimidating. So blank piece of paper, title at the top. And then one of the most important things that I teach is when it comes to capturing your content, when we capture in lined paper, we go from left to right in very long sentences across the lines, and then we start at the next one and we go across. So we're used to capturing in really long lines of information. So if you could start writing your information in what I call like invisible boxes or a square, or block your content is what I call it. So you write a few words and then you go and you start underneath it again, and then you write a few words. So instead of your sentence being in one big long line, now it's like in a little box, and it's not going to be a perfect square, but generally it's going to fit into this like little square. So now if you can imagine, you have a blank piece of paper, you have a title at the top, and now you have a little square of information that you just listened to and captured. Now that you have it in a square, you have all this room around it to be able to add a drawing or put a little box around it or use a little line to connect it to the next block of information, right? Instead of, it's more difficult to add in other additional elements when you just have long lines of paper across your page. So at its foundation, hopefully that can get some people started with some of those things.
I'm inspired to try it out.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Would you mind sharing? I know you have 3 kids yourself. How do you practice this with them? Some creative ideas we can put to use in our homes.
Yeah, so my oldest is 10 and she's just starting to kind of get into the note-taking phase. So she's not quite there yet. I think as she's starting this next grade, she just went into school a few days ago. I'm kind of curious to see how things will unfold for her and how I'll be able to support her in this way. So right now, since they're still pretty young, I'm just like really encouraging all things creative. Like we have an art drawer and they can just make art whenever they want to. I want them to create just to create. There's no product at the end. I don't hang all of my kids' artwork. I trash a lot of it, right? Because it's not necessarily precious. One thing that I learned when I was in early childhood education is like, you don't tell kids that their artwork looks nice, right? Because then they start to create for approval or for that praise and not just to create. So I'm really mindful in what kind of praise I give to them when they're
What do you use
something.
when they ask, Mommy, do you like my drawing? Because I get these questions.
So one of 2 things usually I'll ask, well, do you like it? What do you like about it? I put it back on them. And the second thing is I will comment on what I'm seeing. So I'm not going to say, yeah, it's a pretty picture. I'm going to say, wow, I love how you have this big purple line and it swoops down, and then you've got the green there and you've got the big yellow sun. Like it looks like such a sunshiny day. Like you kind of talk through it, and then you can continue conversation if you want to, like, oh, tell me about why did you choose to add white lines there? Like, what was your thinking about that? And getting them to talk through the process with you a little bit, rather than it just very transactional experience where they're like, Mom, is it pretty? You're like, yes, it's beautiful. And I still say that from time to time, like not perfect by any means, but that's something I am always very mindful of instead of, I don't want them to create for that praise and that approval. I want them to create just to be creative. I really try not to stress about mess, like it is what it is. Like if we want them to be creative, we can't like be too controlling about the mess. All you can do is have your environment set up as much as you can. Like my son, he knows I usually put something on the table before they do something. So like he didn't even ask yesterday. He like I didn't know what he was doing, but he took a pizza box and he cut off the edges. And I didn't even ask. I was like, I don't know what you're doing here, dude. Then he put it on the table and he got a rock and he asked for the paints. And I was like, oh, so he like made himself a little mat. That's pretty smart. Like I didn't ask him to do that, but he would have seen me over time, like putting something down to protect a surface, right? So he just sort of, mimicked that.
And you mentioned they're pretty young for note taking. So there's an age where we can start teaching them sketchnoting. What age do you think that will be?
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on where you are in the world and all of that good stuff. But when they're starting to be taking more notes in their classroom, like if you see them bringing things home. Also, like my daughter, like she is really into comics. She's really into she's got this like Flower Friends comic. I'm going to try to help her digitize it. It's going to be fun. So even just doing those things, like starting to combine words and pictures, like if they're into comics and stuff, encouraging them to start to draw their own. So they're starting to build up their confidence in combining words and pictures. But yeah, like I said, mine's 10. So she's just starting to get, I think, into this year, a little bit of that note taking. So I'm sort of playing around with talking to some different teachers about what that age range is going to be. I started working with a school and I was going in and teaching the grade 9s, and they would be like 14. They were a little bit too cool for school. They were like that kind of, I'm a teenager now, I don't want to be doing that. That's silly, blah, blah, blah. I would love to try to figure out what that sweet spot is where you have a child who is like really into like learning still, but they're not like, that teenager too cool for school yet, vibe. So I'm thinking 10 to 13, I think, because ideally, if they just know this is an option, it doesn't mean they have to do it, but maybe they get introduced to it. And maybe they do a little bit in one class and they don't do it in another. But, and maybe they don't do it for a year or two, but then they get to a class that's really hard and they're really trying to figure out this information. And then they go, oh, yeah, I learned that way to like draw notes again. Like maybe I should bring that back. It's just something in their toolbox that they could pull in if they want to. I've had some people that they didn't learn it until they were entering college. Like that was a place where it was introduced to them. And then they started capturing all their notes in all of their college lectures. And I had one friend, and she actually ended up selling her notes to her professor because of how illustrative they were. And he wanted to use them for his classes, right? So
I think you put it very well. Just being in the habit of combining words and pictures. I think that's enough. If they know that's an option.
Yeah. I don't think there's like a perfect age necessarily, but introducing it at any point. Like one of the things that people often come up and say to me when I'm working is like, oh, your notes at school must have been so amazing. And I'm like, no, they were not. They were boring, no drawings. And I wish I would have learned how to do something like this. Like, I'm mad that this wasn't an option for me. For any doodlers, like the one stat that I do know that I like to talk about, just doodling, not even sketchnoting, just doodling that has nothing to do with the content you're listening to can help you retain up to 29% more information. So I think that's just like leans in on the power of not just doodling, but making it of a learning opportunity to help you remember and engage with that information, not just in the moment, but remember it long term.
Is there anything else you would like to mention that we didn't touch upon?
Oh my gosh, I think we did such a good job. I feel like I had lots of I'm sure I could talk to you for so much longer, but at its core, supporting your kid as much of whatever their creativity is. And I feel like I landed here because even though my creativity was squashed for a little while, I did have a lot of opportunity to explore different things. And I didn't even really know what I liked until I tried out different things. So just providing as many of those opportunities to try different creative mediums.
Thank you, Ashton, for this interesting conversation. I learned so much. Would you like to share where people can find you and learn more from you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm pretty findable on most social if you type in my name in Mind's Eye Creative. But where I'm mostly hanging out these days as more of the educator and not as the professional illustrator, while I'm still doing tons of that, is over at Sketchnote School. So you can learn about my book. I have an online community. I have a free weekly newsletter with a sketchnote tip every Saturday, Sketchnote Saturday, and YouTube channel. And yeah, so all of that information can be found at sketchnote.school. Pretty easy to find. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Friend, if after this conversation you're inspired to learn how to draw your notes like I am, I'm excited to tell you that Ashton will do a workshop for my community, an hour-long introduction to sketchnoting, where she will actually show you on a live call how to do it. And even your kids can join in on the fun. We haven't set up the exact date yet, but it's happening in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. If you really want to participate in this live call and don't want to miss it, send me an email at connect@unlockyourchildsfullpotential.com and I'll add you to the list of participants so you can receive a notification. Thank you so much for listening and letting me be a part of your day. If you enjoyed this episode or the show in general, please share it with a friend and help me reach more moms around the world. Also, if you find some value in this podcast and would like to help support it, please visit my Ko-fi page. The link is in the show notes. Any contribution is much appreciated. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe so you get notified when a new episode drops. I'll see you next week.